I spoke last week and asked the question about the resurrection. Do you really believe it? That is a question we all have to answer. Do you really believe the resurrection? There are three primarily groups of people. One who will say, no, I don't believe it. I don't want to believe it. I'm not going to believe it. It's not for me. It isn't true. Those are the same types of people who will say, my mind's made up. Don't confuse me with facts. Because they'll ignore all the evidence that supports the resurrection, because their pride doesn't want them to accept reality. Then there's a large group of people who are somewhere in the middle. Some say, no, I don't really believe it, but. Then others say, well, I think it is true, but. They act as if, well, we'll wait and see. They're sort of fence sitters. And we know what God says in Revelations about those who are lukewarm about the gospel. Yes. Then there's those who say, yes, I do believe in the resurrection completely. So to those people, there's a second question. If you fully believe it, what are you going to do about it? Because it doesn't end with the resurrection. In Mark 16, it says at the tomb, so they went out quickly and fled from the tomb, for they trembled and were amazed. And they said nothing to anyone, for they were afraid. They were afraid. What were they afraid of? I mean, they knew Christ. They knew him for 3 years. Would they be afraid of him? What were they afraid of? You know, those people who don't want to believe in the resurrection are like the Pharisees. They know the facts, they know the evidence, but they will not accept it. In fact, they'll even pay people to cover it up. They'll try to do everything to avoid acknowledging what science, history, the evidence points to. But those people in the middle are something like the disciples. You know, they went with Jesus for 3 years. They heard him talk about dying. They heard him talk about being put to death. They heard him talk about being resurrected. And they probably all accepted it at the time until it really happened. Because in their hearts, in their minds, they didn't really believe it, that it could happen. You see, this is far, far beyond their experience. It's far beyond our experience. They were rather simple people, probably not educated in those days. They may have known the prophecies, they may not. But they were very simple people who followed Christ and believed him and believed what he said until it actually came to pass. Because when he did become resurrected, they were afraid. Probably afraid of two different things. One, afraid of what this truly meant now that they experienced it, and afraid of what it actually implied for them because it had happened. You see, it meant that what Christ had been telling them all along was actually true. And from their experience, all they had was timidity, fear. They ran away at the crucifixion. They cowered behind closed doors. When Christ met them on the road to Emmaus, they didn't believe it. And the ones who weren't there even further disbelieved it until they actually saw Christ, because they couldn't get their minds wrapped around the resurrection. But once they did fully believe it, these cowering people became lions of courage. These 11 people within 50 years almost toppled the Roman Empire. Within 20 years, they had the Judaic hierarchy on its knees, because they believed at last what they had seen. Do you really believe in the resurrection? If you do, what are you going to do about it? You see, it says Christ went to live and ascended to the right hand of God. He was received up to heaven and sat down at the right hand of God. And they went out and preached everywhere, the Lord working with them and confirming the word. It's amazing what happens when God is behind the word. Do you remember when they first met these fishermen? They were fishing, catching nothing, until God became involved and said, "Fish here." And they couldn't bring the fish in, there were so many. This was an analogy for people. I will make you fishers of men. Over 3,000 came to the church after these disciples became empowered by their knowledge of the resurrection. This is not something which is just confined to the days post-resurrection. We tend not to really put a lot into this anymore. And this is one of the great fallacies of the church, as Pastor Bob will agree. In 180 AD, Irenaeus of Lyon, France, wrote in his book Against Heresies, "Those who are truly his disciples receive grace from him to perform miracles in his name, so as to promote the welfare of other people according to the gift which each one has received from him. For without doubt, some truly drive out demons, so that those who have thus been cleansed from evil spirits often give themselves to the church. Others foresee things to come. They see visions and utter prophetic expressions. Still others have the sick, heal the sick by laying their hands on them, and they are made whole. Yes, moreover, as I've said, the dead have been raised and have remained among us for many years. What more shall I say? It is not possible to name the number of the gifts which the church throughout the whole world has received from God in the name of Jesus Christ. For as she has received freely from God, freely also does she, the church, minister to others. We have said we believed in the resurrection, but we have done little about it. The disciples were afraid until they actually accepted what had happened. Those of us are still afraid, even though we say we've accepted what has happened. It says also that those who believe will be saved. Those who don't will lead to destruction. Just believe. Jesus told Jairus, the head of the synagogue, about his daughter when she had died. He says, don't be afraid. Just believe. So we really do believe in the resurrection. Let us believe in what happens next.
Amen.
Something to think about.
Amen.